The poker chips clattered across the felt table like bones rattling in a graveyard, and Katherine Bailey knew her father had just bet something he did not own, something he had no right to wager, something that made her blood run cold as she stood frozen in the doorway of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Muskogee, Oklahoma. It was the summer of 1882, and the heat pressed down on the small frontier town like a heavy blanket, making everything shimmer in the late afternoon light. Katherine had come looking for her father, hoping to convince him to come home before he drank away what little money they had left. Instead, she found him slouched at a card table, his eyes bloodshot and desperate, facing a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm. Silas Crane was a cattle baron who owned half the territory and wanted the other half, a man who collected debts the way other men collected stamps, with ruthless efficiency and no mercy. "I am telling you, Crane, I am good for it," her father slurred, sweat pouring down his face. "Just one more hand. I can win it all back." "You have nothing left to bet, Bailey," Crane said, his voice smooth as snake oil. "You have already lost your land, your livestock, and every cent to your name, unless you have got something else of value." Katherine should have turned around right then. She should have walked out into the dusty street and kept going. But her feet would not move, and her father's eyes found hers across the crowded saloon. She saw the calculation in his gaze, saw the moment when desperation overcame whatever paternal instinct he might have once possessed. "I have got my daughter," he said, and the words hung in the air like a death sentence. The saloon went quiet. Even the piano player stopped mid-tune, his fingers hovering over the yellowed keys. Katherine felt every eye in the room turn toward her, assessing her value like she was a horse at auction. She was 22 years old, with dark honey-colored hair that fell past her shoulders and green eyes that her mother used to say could see straight into a person's soul. Her mother had been dead for 3 years now, taken by fever, and Katherine suddenly wished she could join her. "Your daughter." Crane leaned back in his chair, studying Katherine with the same cold appraisal he might give a piece of property he was considering purchasing. "She looks healthy enough. Can she cook? So, keep house?" "She can do all that and more," her father said eagerly, and Katherine felt bile rise in her throat. "Best cook in the territory. Strong, too. Never complains. She would be worth her weight in gold to any man." "I am not any man," Crane said, but there was interest in his eyes now, a calculating gleam that made Katherine's skin crawl. "But I suppose I could find use for her. Yes, I will accept your wager, Bailey, one hand of poker. If you win, your debts are cleared. If I win, your daughter comes to work for me until your debts are paid in full." "Work for you," Katherine finally found her voice, stepping forward into the saloon. "You cannot be serious. Father, tell him this is madness." But her father would not meet her eyes. He just nodded eagerly, reaching for the cards the dealer was shuffling. "She agrees," he said, as if he had any right to speak for her. "Deal the cards." "I do not agree," Katherine protested, but her voice was drowned out by the murmur of the crowd. Men were placing side bets now, excited by the spectacle. Someone pressed a whiskey into her father's hand, and he drank it down in one gulp before picking up his cards. Katherine watched in horror as the hand played out. Her father had a pair of tens. Crane laid down a straight ace-high, and just like that, her life was no longer her own. "No," she said, backing toward the door. "No, this is not legal. You cannot sell a person. This is not right." "I am not selling you, girl," her father said, his voice defensive now that he realized what he had done. "You are just working off a debt. It is honest labor." "Honest?" Katherine's voice rose. "You gambled me away like I was a horse or a piece of furniture." "There is nothing honest about any of this." Crane stood up, collecting his winnings with practiced efficiency. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, with iron-gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. "The girl is right about one thing," he said. "This is not entirely legal. But who is going to stop me? The sheriff," he laughed, and several men in the saloon joined in. Everyone knew the sheriff was in Crane's pocket. "No, Miss Bailey, you will come with me and you will work off your father's considerable debts. And if you try to run, I will have the law come after you for theft of services. Do we understand each other?" Katherine understood perfectly. She was trapped, caught in a web of her father's making, with no way out that would not land her in even worse trouble. In 1882, a woman had few rights and even fewer options. She could not own property, could not vote, could not even open a bank account without a man's permission. And now she could not even claim ownership of her own life. How much does he owe? She asked quietly, her mind already racing through possibilities, calculating how long it would take to work off the debt. Crane pulled out a ledger, running his finger down a column of numbers. "With interest, it comes to about $800. $800. It might as well have been 8,000. Katherine felt her knees go weak. At normal wages, it would take her years to earn that much. "What kind of work would I be doing? Cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing around my ranch," Crane said. "I run a large operation. There is always work for willing hands." Willing. As if she had any choice in the matter. Katherine looked at her father one last time, hoping to see some sign of remorse, some indication that he realized the magnitude of what he had just done. But he was already turning back to the bar, calling for another drink, eager to drown out whatever guilt he might be feeling. "I need to get my things," Katherine said, her voice hollow. "You have 1 hour," Crane replied. "I will meet you at the livery stable. Do not even think about running, Miss Bailey. I have men watching every road out of town." Katherine walked out of the saloon into the blazing Oklahoma heat, her mind numb with shock. 1 hour to pack up her entire life, to say goodbye to the small house where she had grown up, where her mother had taught her to bake bread, and sew, and all the other skills a woman was supposed to need. 1 hour before she became little more than an indentured servant to a man she did not know and already feared. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost collided with a man coming around the corner. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she looked up into a face that was all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin. He was tall, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his work shirt, and eyes that were such a pale blue they were almost gray. There was a kindness in those eyes, a warmth that seemed out of place in this harsh land. "Whoa there, miss," he said, his voice low and gentle. "You all right?" Katherine realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face without her even noticing. She wiped at them angrily, embarrassed to be showing weakness in front of a stranger. "I am fine," she lied. "Please excuse me." But he did not let go of her shoulders, studying her face with concern. "You do not look fine. You look like someone just handed you the worst news of your life." "It is none of your concern," Katherine said, trying to pull away, but his grip was firm without being painful. "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I am making it my concern. My name is Thomas Garrett, and I am new in town. Just rode in this morning looking for work. And you are?" "Katherine Bailey," she said automatically, then wished she had given a false name. What if he was one of Crane's men watching to make sure she did not run? "I really must go. I have things to do." "Hold on now," Thomas said, finally releasing her shoulders but not stepping back. "I just came from the Silver Dollar and I heard what happened in there. That business with your father and Silas Crane. That is what has you so upset, is it not?" Katherine felt fresh tears threaten. Of course he had heard. By tomorrow, everyone in the territory would know that James Bailey had gambled his daughter away to pay his debts. She would be a cautionary tale, a warning about what happened to women whose fathers were weak and foolish. "If you heard, then you know there is nothing to be done about it," she said bitterly. "Crane owns my father's debts, which means he owns me now. That is just how things work." "That is not how things should work," Thomas said, and there was anger in his voice now, a righteous fury that made Katherine look at him more closely. "No man should be able to own another person. We fought a war over that not 20 years ago." "A war that was about slaves, not about women," Katherine pointed out. "Women have always been property in one way or another. At least this way I am working off a specific debt. Once it is paid, I will be free." Thomas shook his head. "You really believe Crane will let you go once those debts are paid? Men like him always find a way to add more charges, more interest. You will never be free, not as long as you are under his control." "Then what do you suggest I do?" Katherine demanded, frustration making her voice sharp. "I have no money, no family except a father who clearly does not care what happens to me, and no way to leave town without Crane's men hunting me down. So, unless you have a better idea, I need to go pack my things." She tried to push past him, but Thomas caught her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. "What if I did have a better idea?" he asked. "What if there was a way out of this that did not involve you spending the rest of your life in Crane's service?" Katherine wanted to hope, but she had learned long ago that hope was a dangerous thing. "There is no way out. The debt is legal, recorded in the ledger at the saloon. Everyone saw my father make the bet and lose. Unless you have $800 you are willing to give me out of the kindness of your heart, I am out of options." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Katherine could almost see the wheels turning in his mind. Finally, he said, "I might not have $800, but I know someone who does. And more importantly, I know someone who hates Silas Crane enough to want to see him taken down a peg or two." "Who?" Katherine asked, trying not to let hope creep into her voice. "His name is Marcus Grayson, and he owns a ranch about 20 miles north of here. He and Crane have been feuding for years over water rights and land boundaries. If I explained the situation to him, he might be willing to buy up your father's debts just to spite Crane." "And then I would just owe Marcus Grayson instead," Katherine said. "How is that any better?" "Because Grayson is a fair man," Thomas said. "He would let you work off the debt at fair wages with a contract that spelled everything out clear. No adding on extra charges, no changing the terms. And he treats his workers well. I know because I worked for him last year, helping drive cattle up to Kansas." Katherine studied Thomas's face, trying to decide if she could trust him. He seemed sincere, and there was something about him that made her want to believe. But she had been disappointed too many times to accept his help without question. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." "Because what I saw in that saloon was wrong," Thomas said simply. "And because I have a sister about your age back in Texas, and if someone treated her the way your father just treated you, I would want a stranger to step in and help. Call it paying it forward." Katherine felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she had built up to protect herself from caring too much. This stranger was offering her a lifeline when everyone else in town had just watched her drown. "All right," she said. "I will trust you. What do we do?" Thomas smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less careworn. "First, you go pack your things like you told Crane you would, but do not meet him at the livery stable. Instead, come to the edge of town near the old oak tree by the creek. Do you know the one I mean?" Katherine nodded. Everyone in Muskogee knew that tree. It was ancient and massive, with branches that spread out like a cathedral ceiling. Local legend said it had been a meeting place for the Creek Indians before they were forced out of the territory. "Meet me there in an hour," Thomas continued. I will ride out to the Grayson Ranch and explain the situation. If he agrees to help, I will come back with the money to buy your father's debts from Crane. If he does not, well, we will figure something else out. What if Crane does not want to sell the debts? Katherine asked. What if he wants me specifically? A muscle twitched in Thomas's jaw and his eyes went hard. Then we will cross that bridge when we come to it. But one way or another, Miss Bailey, you are not going to spend the rest of your life as Silas Crane's property. I promise you that. Katherine wanted to believe him. More than that, she wanted to believe that someone in this world cared enough about her welfare to fight for her freedom. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what this means to me. I think I do, Thomas said gently. Now go on, get your things. And Katherine, he waited until she met his eyes. Do not lose hope. Things are going to work out. I feel it in my bones. Katherine hurried home, her mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. The house was empty, her father still at the saloon drinking away what little remained of his dignity. She moved through the rooms quickly, packing her few possessions into a carpet bag her mother had brought west from Tennessee. Clothes, her mother's Bible, a small degria type of her parents on their wedding day when they had still been young and happy and in love. It all fit easily into one bag, a depressing testament to how little she had to show for 22 years of life. She changed out of her good dress, the one she had worn to town, and put on her traveling clothes, a simple brown skirt and white blouse that would not show the dust of the road. She pinned her hair up securely and put on her bonnet, checking her reflection in the small mirror that hung by the door. She looked pale and frightened, but there was determination in her eyes too, a stubbornness that had kept her going through her mother's death and her father's decline into drink and gambling. She left a note on the kitchen table, not because she owed her father any explanation, but because she wanted him to know exactly what he had driven her to do. I am gone, she wrote. Do not look for me. I am working off the debts you created, but on my own terms, not Silas Crane's. Maybe someday I will forgive you for what you did today, but that day is not today. Katherine. Then she walked out of the house without looking back, her carpet bag clutched in one hand and her mother's Bible pressed against her chest with the other. The sun was starting to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Muskogee's Main Street was busy with the usual evening traffic, cowboys coming in from the ranches, families finishing their shopping before the stores closed, the sounds of piano music and laughter spilling out of the saloons. Katherine kept her head down as she made her way through town, not wanting to draw attention to herself. She could feel people watching her, whispering behind their hands. Word had already spread about what had happened at the Silver Dollar. She was the scandal of the day, the poor girl whose father had gambled her away. Tomorrow there would be a new scandal and she would be forgotten, but for now she was the center of attention and she hated it. The old oak tree stood at the edge of town, its massive trunk wider than 3 men standing side by side. Katherine sat down on one of its gnarled roots, her bag at her feet, and waited. The creek babbled nearby, swollen with summer rain, and she listened to its soothing rhythm, trying to calm her racing heart. What if Thomas did not come back? What if Marcus Grayson refused to help? What if Crane found her before Thomas returned? She tried not to think about what would happen if this plan failed. Crane had made it clear that he expected her at the livery stable, and when she did not show up, he would come looking for her. He had the law on his side, such as it was, and the power to make her life a living hell if she defied him. But she would rather risk his anger than meekly accept her fate. Her mother had always told her that she had fire in her blood, that she was too stubborn to let the world grind her down. It was time to prove her mother right. The sun had nearly touched the horizon when Katherine heard the sound of horses approaching. She stood up, her heart pounding, ready to run if it was Crane's men. But then she saw Thomas riding toward her on a gray gelding, and beside him was an older man on a big bay stallion. The older man had silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent in the sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. Thomas swung down from his horse and came to her immediately. "Katherine, this is Marcus Grayson. I told him everything, and he has agreed to help." Marcus dismounted more slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose joints had started to protest hard use. He studied Katherine with those sharp eyes, and she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. She would not show weakness, not now, not when her future hung in the balance. "Miss Bailey," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Thomas has told me about your situation, and I want you to know that I find it appalling. No woman should be treated as property, and your father should be horsewhipped for what he did to you." "Thank you, sir," Katherine said. "Thomas said you might be willing to buy my father's debts from Mr. Crane." "More than willing," Marcus said. "Silas Crane is a snake, and I would pay good money just to see the look on his face when I take something he thought was his. But I want you to understand the terms clearly, so there are no misunderstandings later. I will pay off your father's debts in full, $800. In exchange, you will come work at my ranch. I will pay you standard wages, $20 a month plus room and board. That means it will take you 40 months to pay off the debt, a little over 3 years. 3 years. It was a long time, but it was also a defined period with a clear end date, and $20 a month was generous, more than most ranches paid their help." "That sounds fair," Katherine said. "But what happens if Mr. Crane refuses to sell the debts to you?" A smile played at the corners of Marcus's mouth, and for the first time, Katherine could see the steel underneath his gentlemanly exterior. "Then I will make him an offer he cannot refuse. I know things about Silas Crane, things he would not want becoming public knowledge. He will sell me those debts, Miss Bailey. You have my word on that." Katherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was not free, not yet, but she was no longer trapped in Crane's clutches. "Then I accept your terms, Mr. Grayson, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart." "Save your thanks until after we have dealt with Crane," Marcus said. "Thomas, you stay here with Miss Bailey. I will ride into town and handle this business. If I am not back within 2 hours, you take her to the ranch and keep her safe there." "Understood, understood," Thomas said. "But, sir, maybe I should go with you. Crane can be dangerous when he is crossed." "Which is exactly why I am going alone," Marcus said. "I am an old man, and I have been dealing with men like Crane since before you were born. I know how to handle him." He turned back to Katherine. "Do not worry, Miss Bailey. By the time the sun sets, you will be a free woman." He mounted his horse and rode off toward town, leaving Katherine and Thomas alone under the oak tree. The silence stretched between them, awkward now that the urgency of the situation had passed. Katherine sat back down on the root, and after a moment, Thomas joined her, keeping a respectful distance between them. "How did you convince Mr. Grayson to help me?" Katherine asked finally. "You said you worked for him last year, but that does not mean he owed you any favors." Thomas picked up a twig and started breaking it into smaller pieces, not meeting her eyes. "I told him the truth, that I saw an injustice and wanted to make it right, and I may have mentioned that you reminded me of my sister. The one in Texas. Yes. Her name is Sarah, and she is 20 years old. She married a good man last year, a farmer who treats her well and makes her happy. But before she met him, she was courted by a man who wanted to own her, to control every aspect of her life. When she refused him, he spread lies about her, tried to ruin her reputation so no decent man would have her. I wanted to kill him for that, but Sarah made me promise not to do anything that would land me in jail. Katherine heard the pain in his voice and understood that this was more than just a good deed for a stranger. He was fighting old battles, trying to protect her the way he had not been able to protect his sister. "What happened?" she asked gently. She met her husband, a man who saw through the lies and loved her anyway. They are happy now, building a life together, but it taught me something important. It taught me that sometimes the only thing standing between a woman and a terrible fate is one person willing to speak up, willing to fight for what is right. So when I saw what your father did to you, I knew I could not just walk away. Katherine felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of fear or despair. They were tears of gratitude, of relief at finding an ally in this harsh world. "You are a good man, Thomas Garrett," she said softly. "Your sister is lucky to have a brother like you." Thomas finally looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I am not that good," he said. "If I were, I would have stopped your father before he made that bet. I would have punched him in the face and dragged him out of that saloon before he could say those words." "You did not know me then," Katherine pointed out. "You had no reason to interfere." "I do not need a reason to know that what he did was wrong," Thomas said fiercely. "Every man in that saloon knew it was wrong, but they all just stood there and watched. They treated it like entertainment, like your life was just a show for their amusement. It made me sick." Katherine reached out and touched his hand, a brief contact that sent a jolt of awareness through her. "But you did not just stand there. You came to help me. That matters more than you know." They sat in companionable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and purple. Katherine found herself studying Thomas's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at his neck. He was handsome in a rugged, no-nonsense way, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her mother died. "Tell me about yourself," she said, wanting to know more about this man who had upended her life in the best possible way. "Where are you from? What brings you to Oklahoma?" Thomas smiled slightly. "I grew up in Texas, near a town called Abilene. My father runs a small ranch there, nothing fancy but enough to support the family. I am the oldest of 4 children. After Sarah, there is my brother Matthew, who is 18 and wants to be a doctor, and my youngest sister Lucy, who is 16 and convinced she is going to be a famous actress in New York City." "Why did you leave?" Katherine asked. "It sounds like you have a good family." "I do," Thomas agreed. "But the ranch is not big enough to support all of us. Matthew needs money for medical school, and Lucy's dreams are going to take her far from Texas. I figured the best thing I could do was strike out on my own, make my own way, and send money back home when I can. I have been working as a ranch hand, picking up jobs where I can find them. Heard there was work to be had in the Oklahoma Territory, so I rode up here to see what opportunities might be available." "And now you have involved yourself in my problems," Katherine said. "I am sorry. This is not what you signed up for when you rode into Muskogee this morning." "Do not apologize," Thomas said firmly. "I am glad I was there, glad I could help, and who knows, maybe Marcus will hire me on at his ranch, then we would be working together." The thought of spending the next 3 years working alongside Thomas made Katherine's heart skip a beat. She barely knew this man, had met him only a few hours ago, but there was something about him that drew her in, made her want to know him better. She tried to push the feeling aside. Now was not the time to be thinking about romance. She had just escaped one form of bondage and was about to enter into another, albeit a more benevolent one. The last thing she needed was to complicate matters by developing feelings for her rescuer. But as they sat together under the darkening sky, waiting for Marcus to return, Katherine could not help but imagine what it might be like to see Thomas every day, to work beside him, to slowly build a friendship that might someday turn into something more. It was a dangerous fantasy, one that could lead to heartbreak if she let herself believe in it too much. But after the horror of the afternoon, she needed something hopeful to cling to, even if it was just a dream. They heard the horses before they saw them, Marcus returning with two other men Katherine did not recognize. She stood up quickly, her heart pounding, afraid that something had gone wrong. But Marcus was smiling as he dismounted, and he held up a sheaf of papers. "It is done," he announced. "Your father's debts are paid in full, and these papers now belong to me." He handed them to Katherine, and she stared at them in disbelief. They were promissory notes, IOUs her father had signed over the past year, all of them now stamped paid in full in bold red ink. "I believe you should have the honor of destroying them," Marcus said. "After all, they represent your freedom." Katherine took the papers with trembling hands. She looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly, and then she tore the first paper in half. The sound of ripping paper was incredibly satisfying, and she tore again and again until the notes were nothing but confetti scattered on the ground at her feet. With each tear, she felt lighter, freer, until she was laughing through her tears, unable to believe this was really happening. "How did Crane react when you made the offer?" Thomas asked Marcus. "About as well as you might expect," Marcus said dryly. "He was furious, of course, accused me of interfering in his business, of undermining his authority. But when I pointed out that cash money today was better than the uncertain prospect of collecting labor from an unwilling worker, he saw reason. I may have also mentioned certain business dealings of his that might not stand up to scrutiny if brought to the attention of federal authorities." "You blackmailed him," Katherine said, not sure whether to be shocked or impressed. "I prefer to think of it as persuasive negotiation," Marcus said with a wink. "The important thing is that you are no longer in his power, and I want to make something clear, Miss Bailey. The agreement I made with you earlier about working off the debt at my ranch, that stands only if you want it to. You are free to go wherever you wish. I will not hold you to anything." Katherine stared at him in shock. "But you just paid $800 for me." "I paid $800 to free you," Marcus corrected. "There is a difference. If you want to work at my ranch, you are more than welcome. I need help and you need employment. But if you would rather go somewhere else, start fresh in a new town where no one knows your story, I will not stop you. I will even give you money for the stagecoach." Katherine felt tears streaming down her face again. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from being property to being free, truly free, with choices she could make for herself. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I want to come to your ranch," she said firmly. "I want to work off the debt honestly, even if you are willing to forgive it. And I want to prove to myself that I am worth more than what my father thought I was." Marcus nodded approvingly. "You have spirit, Miss Bailey. I like that. You are going to do well at the ranch." He looked at Thomas. "And you, young man, are you still looking for work?" "Yes, sir," Thomas said. "I am." "Then you are hired," Marcus said. "I need a good man to help manage my horses. I have about 50 head that need breaking and training for sale. Can you handle that?" "I can," Thomas said confidently. "I have been working with horses since I was old enough to sit a saddle." "Good. Then let us get back to the ranch before full dark. It is about a 2-hour ride, and I want to get Miss Bailey settled in before she collapses from exhaustion. She has been through quite an ordeal today." They rode north out of Muskogee, Marcus leading the way, Katherine riding behind Thomas on his gray gelding because Marcus had not brought a spare horse. She sat side-saddle, holding onto Thomas's waist, acutely aware of the warmth of his body against hers, the way his muscles shifted as he guided the horse. It was improper, riding this way, but under the circumstances, no one seemed to care much about propriety. The Oklahoma landscape rolled past them in the gathering darkness. Open prairie broken by occasional stands of trees, and the glint of creeks catching the last light. Katherine had never been this far from Muskogee, had never really left town except for occasional trips to church socials at neighboring farms. The world seemed much bigger out here, full of possibilities she had never considered before. "Are you doing all right?" Thomas asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. "I am doing better than all right," Katherine said. "I am free. I still cannot quite believe it." "Believe it," Thomas said. "And believe this too. You are going to thrive at the Grayson Ranch. Marcus is a good man, and he will treat you fairly. You are going to have a good life, Katherine." She wanted to tell him that she hoped he would be part of that life, that in the few short hours since they had met, he had become important to her in ways she could not quite explain. But the words stuck in her throat, and she just held on tighter as they rode through the darkness toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The Grayson Ranch appeared as a collection of lights in the distance, lanterns glowing in windows like stars fallen to earth. As they drew closer, Katherine could make out the shapes of buildings, a large house, several barns, corrals full of horses and cattle. It was a substantial operation, much bigger than she had expected. A woman came out onto the porch of the main house as they rode up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that looked kind but no nonsense. "Marcus Grayson, where have you been?" she called out. "Supper has been ready for an hour, and Mabel has been fretting something terrible." "Sorry, Rebecca," Marcus said, dismounting and helping Katherine down from Thomas's horse. "I had some business in town that could not wait. This is Miss Katherine Bailey. She's going to be working for us as a cook and housekeeper." "Katherine, this is Rebecca Turner, my housekeeper and the woman who actually runs this place." Rebecca looked Katherine up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You look half dead on your feet, child. What has that old fool been putting you through?" "It is a long story," Katherine said wearily. "But the short version is that Mr. Grayson saved me from a very bad situation, and I owe him more than I can ever repay." Rebecca's expression softened. "Well then, you can tell me the whole story after you have had a hot meal and a good rest. Come on inside and I will get you settled." She turned to Marcus. "And you, bring that young man with you. He looks like he could use a good meal too." The inside of the ranch house was warm and welcoming, with a large kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and stew. Rebecca bustled about, filling bowls and cutting thick slices of bread while Marcus and Thomas washed up at the pump outside. Katherine sat at the large wooden table, feeling like she had stumbled into some kind of dream. Just this morning, she had woken up in her father's house, worried about how they would pay for groceries. Now she was sitting in a stranger's kitchen, about to start a whole new life. Thomas came in and sat down across from her, and their eyes met across the table. He smiled at her, and she felt that same jolt of awareness she had felt under the oak tree. This was the man who had saved her, who had seen her at her lowest moment and chosen to help rather than look away. She did not know what the future held, but she knew she wanted him to be part of it. Over supper, Marcus explained the situation to Rebecca, who listened with growing outrage. "James Bailey should be ashamed of himself," she declared when he finished. "And as for Silas Crane, well, he is lucky Marcus got to him before I did. I would have given him a piece of my mind he would not soon forget." "I have no doubt of that," Marcus said with affection. "Katherine, Rebecca will show you to your room after supper. You will be staying in the house with us, in the room next to Rebecca's. In the morning, we can discuss your duties and get you acquainted with how things work around here." "Thank you," Katherine said, "for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I do not have adequate words to express my gratitude." "You can express it by working hard and making a good life for yourself," Marcus said. "That is all the thanks I need." After supper, Rebecca led Katherine upstairs to a small but comfortable room with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the corrals. It was more than Katherine had dared hope for, and she sank down onto the bed with a sigh of relief. "I will bring you some hot water for washing," Rebecca said, "and some night clothes. You look about the same size as my daughter. She is married and living in Kansas now, but she left some things here." "You are very kind," Katherine said. Rebecca paused in the doorway. "I lost a daughter to a bad marriage once," she said quietly. "Her husband was a cruel man, and he made her life a misery until the day she died giving birth to his child. I was not able to save her, but I am glad Marcus was able to save you. So you just settle in and make yourself at home, Miss Bailey. You are safe here." Left alone, Katherine finally allowed herself to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her mother, who had tried so hard to protect her and who would have been horrified by what her father had done. She cried for herself, for the innocence she had lost today, for the realization that the man who should have loved and protected her was willing to sell her to cover his gambling debts. And she cried with relief, with gratitude that somehow, against all odds, she had found people willing to help her when she needed it most. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face in the basin of cool water on the washstand and looked at herself in the small mirror. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale and drawn. But underneath the exhaustion and the tear tracks, she saw something else. She saw strength. She saw determination. She saw a woman who had survived the worst day of her life and come out the other side still fighting. She would work hard at the Grayson Ranch. She would prove to herself and everyone else that she was worth more than $800, more than her father's debts, more than Silas Crane's contempt. And maybe, just maybe, she would allow herself to hope that the man with the kind blue eyes might see her as more than just a woman who needed rescuing. Katherine slept dreamlessly that first night, exhausted by the emotional turmoil of the day. She woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of roosters crowing in the yard below. For a moment, she was disoriented, not sure where she was. Then memory came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, looking around the unfamiliar room. Someone had left a pitcher of fresh water on the washstand, along with a towel and a simple blue dress that looked like it would fit her. Katherine washed quickly and put on the dress, pinning up her hair and trying to make herself look presentable. She had no idea what time it was, but judging by the sun's position, it was well past dawn. She hoped she had not overslept and made a bad impression on her first day. She made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and bacon. The kitchen was bustling with activity. Rebecca was at the stove, flipping flapjacks on a griddle, while a young Mexican girl set the table. Marcus sat at the head of the table reading a newspaper, and Thomas was nowhere to be seen. "Good morning," Katherine said hesitantly from the doorway. "There you are," Rebecca said cheerfully. "I was just about to send Mabel up to check on you. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Katherine admitted. "I am sorry for sleeping so late. I did not mean to be lazy." "Lazy?" Marcus looked up from his paper with a snort. "Child, after what you went through yesterday, you earned a good night's sleep. Besides, it is only 7 o'clock. Most of the hands do not eat breakfast until 8. Katherine felt relief wash over her. She was not late after all. "What would you like me to do today?" Today, you rest and get your bearings, Rebecca said firmly. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start working. For now, just eat some breakfast and let me show you around the place. They ate together, Marcus explaining how the ranch operated. He ran about 2,000 head of cattle. Along with the horses, Thomas would be training. He employed about 20 men, a mix of cowboys, stable hands, and farm workers who tended the vegetable gardens and orchards. Rebecca managed the household, which included cooking for everyone, keeping the house clean and managing the ranch's finances. We have been short-handed since our last cook left to get married, Rebecca explained. I have been trying to do everything myself, and I am not as young as I used to be. Having you here is going to be a tremendous help. I am a good cook, Katherine said. My mother taught me everything she knew and she learned from her mother. I can make most anything, given the right ingredients, music to my ears, Rebecca said. The men have been complaining about my biscuits for months. Maybe yours will be better. After breakfast, Rebecca gave Katherine a tour of the ranch. The main house was larger than it had seemed from the outside, with a big kitchen, a formal dining room that Rebecca said they only used for special occasions, a parlor with comfortable furniture and bookshelves lining the walls, and upstairs, 6 bedrooms. Marcus lived alone in the house except for Rebecca, who had her own room on the first floor. Outside, there were 3 barns, one for dairy cows and general livestock, one for horses, and one that served as a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. There was a smokehouse, a root cellar, a chicken coop, and extensive vegetable gardens that produced most of the food consumed on the ranch. A creek ran through the property, providing water for the livestock and irrigation for the crops. Katherine saw Thomas working in one of the corrals, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a wild-looking Mustang dancing at the end of a long rope. He was speaking to the horse in a low, soothing voice, his movements slow and deliberate. The horse was clearly frightened, tossing its head and trying to pull away, but Thomas was patient, waiting for the animal to calm down before taking another step closer. He is good with horses, Rebecca observed, following Katherine's gaze. Marcus knew that the moment he saw him. Said he has a gift for it, a way of understanding what the animal is thinking. He has a gift for understanding people too, Katherine said softly, remembering how Thomas had seen her distress yesterday and immediately moved to help. Rebecca gave her a knowing look. He is a good man. Handsome too, if you like that rangy cowboy type. Katherine felt her cheeks heat. I barely know him. Give it time, Rebecca said with a smile. You are both young and unattached. Nature has a way of working these things out. They spent the rest of the morning in the kitchen, Rebecca showing Katherine where everything was stored and explaining the routine. Breakfast at 8 for the ranch hands, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. Marcus preferred simple fare, nothing fancy but plenty of it. The men worked hard and ate accordingly. Can you bake bread? Rebecca asked. I can, Katherine said. My mother's recipe is particularly good. Everyone in Muskogee used to say she made the best bread in the territory. Then we will put you in charge of bread starting tomorrow, Rebecca said. I will handle the main meals until you get comfortable with cooking for such a large group. Does that sound fair? More than fair, Katherine said. Thank you for being so patient with me. Nonsense. You are going to be a blessing, I can tell already. That afternoon, Katherine found herself with unexpected free time. Rebecca insisted she was not to work that first day, and there was nothing for her to do but explore the ranch on her own. She wandered down to the creek, sitting on a fallen log and watching the water flow past. It was peaceful here, so different from the noise and bustle of town. She could hear birds singing in the trees, the distant lowing of cattle, the the sound of hammers from somewhere near the barns where men were making repairs. "Mind if I join you?" Katherine looked up to find Thomas approaching, his hat in his hands, his dark hair damp with sweat. He had been working hard, that much was obvious, but he looked happy, energized in a way she had not seen the day before. "Please," she said, moving over to make room on the log. Thomas sat down beside her, stretching out his long legs. "I saw you watching me work with that Mustang this morning. I hope I was not distracting you. Not at all. It is nice to know someone is interested in what I am doing." He glanced at her sideways. "How are you holding up?" "Yesterday was quite a day." "I am still trying to process it all," Katherine admitted. "Part of me keeps expecting to wake up and find out it was all a dream, that I am actually on my way to Crane's ranch to start my life as his property." "That is never going to happen," Thomas said firmly. "You are free, Katherine, and you are going to stay free." "Thanks to you," she said. "If you had not stopped to help me, if you had just kept walking like everyone else in that town, I would be trapped right now." Thomas was quiet for a moment, staring at the water. "Can I tell you something?" he asked finally. "Something I have not told anyone else, of course. When I saw what your father did, when I heard him offer you up as payment for his debts, I felt something I have never felt before. It was like rage and protectiveness and something else all mixed together. I barely knew you, had never even spoken to you, but I knew in that moment that I would do whatever it took to get you away from Crane. I would have robbed a bank if I had to, would have stolen the money to buy your freedom. Does that sound crazy?" Katherine's heart was pounding. "It sounds like the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." Thomas turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "I do not understand it myself. I have never been the kind of man who believes in fate or destiny or love at first sight. But there was something about you, Katherine, something that called to me. And now that I have met you, now that I have talked with you, I know I was right to trust that instinct. You are remarkable." "I am not remarkable," Katherine protested. "I am just a woman who was in the wrong place at the wrong time." "You are a woman who has been through hell and came out the other side with her spirit intact," Thomas corrected. "You are a woman who chose to fight for her freedom rather than accept her fate. That is remarkable in my book." Katherine felt tears threatening again, but these were happy tears. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Thomas said gently. "I just wanted you to know how I feel, and I want you to know that I am here for as long as you want me around. Not because you owe me anything, but because I want to be here." "I want you here," Katherine said softly. "I want to get to know you better, to understand this connection I feel between us. Is that all right?" "That is more than all right," Thomas said, and he smiled that smile that made his whole face light up. "That is perfect." They sat together by the creek for a long time, talking about their lives, their hopes, their dreams. Thomas told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope and ride before he could read, about the time he and his brother had gotten lost on the open range and had to survive for 3 days on nothing but water and determination. Katherine told him about her mother, about the woman who had taught her to be strong and independent, who had made her promise to never let a man define her worth. "She would have liked you," Katherine said. "She always said I should find a man who saw me as a partner, not a possession. A man who would stand beside me, not in front of me or behind me." "I can be that man," Thomas said, "if you will let me." It was too soon to make promises, too soon to know where this connection might lead. But sitting there beside the creek with the Oklahoma sun warm on her face and Thomas's hand reaching for hers, Katherine allowed herself to hope. She allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not alone, where she had someone who cared about her, who would fight for her the way Thomas had fought yesterday. They walked back to the ranch house together as the sun started to sink toward the horizon, and Rebecca met them at the door with a knowing smile. "Supper is almost ready," she said. "You two had better wash up." That night, Katherine helped serve the meal, carrying platters of roast beef and potatoes out to the long table where the ranch hands ate. The men were polite, tipping their hats and thanking her, but she could see the curiosity in their eyes. They knew why she was here, or at least they knew part of the story. Rebecca had probably told them she was a woman in need of help, and ranch culture being what it was, they would protect her as one of their own. After supper, Marcus invited Katherine and Thomas into the parlor. He poured himself a whiskey and offered one to Thomas, who accepted, and then settled into a comfortable chair. "I want to discuss your working arrangements," he said. "Katherine, Rebecca tells me you are a skilled cook, and that you will be taking over bread making and assisting with meals. In addition, I would like you to help with the household accounts. Rebecca has been doing them, but her eyes are not what they used to be, and she has been making errors. Can you read and write?" "Yes, sir," Katherine said. "My mother insisted I get an education. I can read, write, and do figures." "Excellent. Then in addition to your kitchen duties, you will spend 2 hours each day on the books. That should reduce your debt repayment time considerably, as bookkeeping is skilled labor worth more than cooking." Katherine felt a surge of hope. "How much more?" Marcus did some quick calculations in his head. "At the rate I am paying you for cooking and housekeeping, plus the additional wages for bookkeeping, I would say you could have your debt paid off in about 2 years instead of 3. Does that sound acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Katherine said. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson." "Call me Marcus," he said. "We are not formal around here. Now, Thomas, I want to discuss your duties as well. You will be in charge of breaking and training the horses. I have 50 head that need to be ready for sale by spring, which means you have about 8 months to work with them. I am paying you $30 a month plus room and board. If you can get all 50 horses trained by deadline, there is a bonus in it for you, $200. Thomas let out a low whistle. "That is generous, sir. I mean, Marcus." "I reward good work," Marcus said simply, "and I have a feeling you are going to do very good work indeed." The days fell into a comfortable rhythm after that. Katherine woke before dawn each morning to start the bread, kneading the dough with strong, practiced hands while the kitchen was still dark and quiet. She found peace in the work, in the simple act of creating something nourishing and good. By the time the sun came up, she had 4 loaves baking in the oven, filling the house with their warm, yeasty smell. She helped Rebecca prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, scrambling dozens of eggs and frying pounds of bacon until the kitchen was filled with smoke and steam. The men ate with single-minded focus, shoveling food into their mouths like they were fueling machines rather than feeding themselves. They always complimented the food, though, especially the bread, which disappeared faster than she could slice it. After breakfast, while Rebecca started preparing for the noon meal, Katherine would spend 2 hours in Marcus's office, going over the ranch accounts. She discovered she had a head for numbers, a natural ability to see patterns and catch errors. The books had been in disarray, with entries missing or incorrectly recorded, and she set about fixing them with methodical determination. Marcus would often sit with her during these sessions, explaining the business side of ranching, teaching her about profit margins and operating costs and how to negotiate with buyers. He treated her like an apprentice rather than a servant, answering her questions with patience and respect. "You have a good mind for business," he told her one afternoon as she worked through a particularly complicated set of transactions. "If you ever decide you do not want to be a cook, you could make a living as a bookkeeper or accountant." The thought had never occurred to Katherine before. Women did not typically work in business, at least not openly. But Marcus seemed to think it was possible, and his confidence made her believe it too. In the afternoons, she would help Rebecca with the housework, cleaning and mending and preparing for supper. And every evening, after the work was done and the dishes were washed, she would find her way down to the creek where Thomas would be waiting. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their days, their thoughts, their dreams. Thomas told her about the horses he was training, about their individual personalities and quirks. She told him about the ranch accounts, about the fascinating complexity of running a successful business. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to see, the kind of lives they hoped to build for themselves. And slowly, inevitably, they fell in love. It was not a sudden thing, not a bolt of lightning or a moment of clarity. It was gradual, like the sun rising, so slow you did not notice it happening until suddenly everything was bright and warm and full of possibility. Katherine found herself thinking about Thomas during the day, wondering what he was doing, looking forward to seeing him at supper. She memorized the way he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the gentle way he touched her hand when they sat together by the creek. Thomas was equally smitten, though he tried to hide it at first. He did not want to rush her, did not want to take advantage of the gratitude she felt toward him. But Katherine could see it in his eyes every time he looked at her, could feel it in the way he found excuses to be near her, helping carry water from the well or chopping wood for the kitchen stove. "You two are adorable," Rebecca said one morning, watching Thomas leave the kitchen after dropping off a basket of fresh eggs for Katherine. "Like a couple of lovesick puppies." "We are just friends," Katherine protested, but she could feel her cheeks burning. "Friends who look at each other like you are the only two people in the world," Rebecca said with a laugh. "Child, I was young once too. I know what falling in love looks like." "It is too soon," Katherine said. "I have only been here a month. I barely know him." "Sometimes a month is all it takes," Rebecca said wisely. "My late husband proposed to me after knowing me for 3 weeks. We were married 42 years before he passed, and I never regretted saying yes." Katherine wanted to believe that what she felt for Thomas was real, that it was not just gratitude or the natural result of two lonely people finding comfort in each other. But she was afraid to trust her feelings, afraid of being hurt again. The autumn came, bringing cooler temperatures and the back-breaking work of harvest. Katherine learned to can vegetables and fruits, preserving the summer's bounty for the long winter ahead. She made apple butter and peach preserves, pickled cucumbers and green beans, dried herbs and smoked meats. Her hands were constantly busy, and she fell into bed each night exhausted but satisfied. Thomas made remarkable progress with the horses, his patience and skill evident in the way the wild mustangs gradually became calm, responsive animals that would fetch good prices at market. Marcus was impressed, often standing at the corral fence to watch Thomas work, nodding his approval. "That boy is going to earn his bonus," he told Katherine one evening. "He is the best horse trainer I have ever seen." Katherine felt a surge of pride, as if Thomas's accomplishments were somehow her own. She was proud of him, proud of his work ethic and his kindness to the animals in his care. She found herself imagining what it might be like to build a life with a man like that, to wake up beside him every morning and work alongside him every day. But she kept those thoughts to herself, afraid to voice them aloud and make them real. It was late October when everything changed. Katherine was in the kitchen making pies for the upcoming harvest celebration when Marcus came in, his face grave. "Katherine, I need to speak with you," he said. "There is news from town." Katherine set down her rolling pin, her heart suddenly pounding. "What kind of news?" "Your father is dead," Marcus said gently. "He was found this morning in an alley behind the silver dollar. The doctor says it was his heart, likely brought on by years of drinking." Katherine sat down hard on one of the kitchen chairs, not sure what she was feeling. Sadness, relief, guilt that she felt relief. "How did you hear?" "The sheriff sent word," Marcus said. "Your father died with no assets, and there is the matter of burial costs. As his only living relative, you are responsible for arranging and paying for his funeral." "I have no money," Katherine said numbly. "Everything I earn goes toward paying off my debt to you." "I will cover the costs," Marcus said. "And I will take you into town tomorrow for the funeral, if you wish to attend." Katherine thought about her father, about the man he had been before drink and desperation had destroyed him. She thought about her mother, who had loved him despite his flaws, who had stood by him even when it cost her everything. "Yes," she said finally, "I should be there. My mother would want me to say a proper goodbye." The funeral was a small, sad affair attended by only a handful of people. Katherine stood at the graveside in her best black dress, which Rebecca had lent her, and listened to the preacher say words about redemption and forgiveness. She did not feel forgiving. She felt empty, hollowed out by the complicated grief of losing a father who had betrayed her. Thomas stood beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence, solid and reassuring. He had insisted on coming with her and Marcus, even though it meant taking a day away from his work with the horses. "You should not have to face this alone," he had said, and Katherine had been grateful beyond words. After the funeral, as they were walking back to where Marcus had tied the horses, Katherine saw Silas Crane standing across the street, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. He tipped his hat mockingly, and Katherine felt a chill run down her spine. "Ignore him," Thomas said, taking her arm. "He has no power over you anymore." But that night, as Katherine lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she could not shake the feeling that Crane was not done with her. Men like him did not like to lose, and she had cost him not just money but pride. She wondered what he might do to get revenge, and the thought kept her awake long into the night. The next few weeks passed without incident, and Katherine started to relax. The harvest celebration came and went, a joyful evening of dancing and music, where Thomas held her close during the slow songs and spun her dizzy during the fast ones. The ranch hands treated her like family now, including her in their jokes and asking her opinion on matters great and small. She was happy, Katherine realized with some surprise. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she was truly happy. She had meaningful work, friends who cared about her, a home where she felt safe and valued. And she had Thomas, whose presence in her life had become as necessary as breathing. It was early November when Thomas finally spoke the words Katherine had been both hoping for and dreading to hear. They were sitting by the creek as usual, wrapped in coats against the autumn chill, watching the water flow past in the gathering darkness. "Katherine," Thomas said, his voice serious. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen all the way through before you respond. Can you do that?" Katherine's heart started to race, but she nodded. "All right." Thomas took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you in front of that saloon, looking so brave and so broken at the same time. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am sure of what I feel. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. You make me want to be a better man, to build a better life. And I want to build that life with you." He paused, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small wooden box. Inside was a simple gold ring, nothing fancy but beautiful in its simplicity. "I made this myself," he said. "Melted down some gold coins I had been saving and shaped it with my own hands. It is not much, but it is honest, and it is given with all my heart." Katherine stared at the ring, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas, I still have 2 years of debt to pay off. I am not free to marry anyone." "I know," Thomas said, "and I am not asking you to marry me right now. I am asking you to promise yourself to me, to commit to a future together once your debt is paid. I will wait as long as it takes, Katherine. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I will wait for you." Katherine looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and love. This man who had saved her from a terrible fate, who had stood by her through everything, who had become her best friend and her greatest source of joy, was offering her a future. How could she say anything but yes? "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have loved you since you tore up those debt papers and gave me back my freedom. Yes, Thomas. Yes, I will promise myself to you. I will marry you once my debt is paid." Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly as if it had been made for her, which of course it had. He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle at first and then with growing passion, and Katherine felt like she was coming home after a long journey. They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, and when they told Marcus and Rebecca the news, the older woman cried happy tears while Marcus pulled out a bottle of his best whiskey to toast their engagement. "You two are going to have a good life together," Marcus said, raising his glass. "I can see it. You are both hard workers, both honest and true. That is what makes a marriage last." Katherine went to bed that night with Thomas's ring on her finger and hope in her heart. She had gone from being property to being free to being loved in the space of just a few months. It seemed like a miracle, like something out of a storybook rather than real life, but the miracle was not over yet. A week later, Marcus called Katherine into his office with an unusual request. "I have been thinking about your situation," he said, "about the debt you are working off. And I want to make you an offer." Katherine sat down, curious. "What kind of offer?" "I have been looking at the books, the work you have done putting them in order, and I estimate you have saved me about $300 in prevented errors and better negotiation with suppliers." "That is significant money, Katherine, money that would have been lost if you had not caught those mistakes." "I was just doing my job," Katherine said. "You were doing more than that," Marcus insisted. "You were using your considerable intelligence and skill to improve my business. And I want to reward that. So here is my offer. I will consider your bookkeeping work to have already paid off $300 of your debt. That leaves you with $500 remaining, which at your current rate of pay will be worked off in about 15 months instead of 2 years. Katherine felt her eyes widen. "Marcus, that is too generous. I cannot accept that." "Yes, you can and you will," Marcus said firmly. "You have earned it, Katherine, and besides, I have selfish reasons. I want you and Thomas to be able to marry sooner rather than later. He is the best horse trainer I have ever had, and I do not want to risk losing him because he gets impatient waiting for you to pay off your debt." Katherine laughed through her tears. "You are a good man, Marcus Grayson, the best man I know except for Thomas." "High praise indeed," Marcus said with a smile. "Now go tell that young man of yours the good news. I expect he will be very happy to hear it." Thomas was ecstatic when Katherine told him, picking her up and spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. 15 months, he said. "That is next February. We could be married by spring." "We could plant a garden," Katherine said, caught up in his enthusiasm. "We could have a home of our own." "About that," Thomas said, setting her down gently, "I have been talking with Marcus about buying some land. There is a parcel about 5 miles from here, good grazing land with a creek running through it. The owner is willing to sell for a fair price, and Marcus said he would loan me the money if I continue working for him, while I build up my own herd." "What would you think about starting a ranch of our own?" Katherine had never imagined owning land, having a place that was truly hers. The idea was intoxicating. "I think that sounds wonderful," she said. "I think that sounds like a dream come true." They spent the next months planning and dreaming, stealing moments together whenever they could. Thomas continued training horses while Katherine managed the household and the books. She saved every penny she could, putting aside money for their future home. Thomas did the same, his bonus for training all 50 horses adding a substantial sum to their savings. Winter came, bringing snow and cold winds that howled across the prairie. Katherine and Rebecca worked in the warm kitchen, baking and cooking and preserving, while the men huddled in the barns or rode out in blizzards to check on livestock. It was hard work, but there was a camaraderie to it, a sense of everyone pulling together to survive the harsh season. Christmas came, and Marcus threw a party for all the ranch hands and their families. There was roast goose and mince pies, fiddle music and dancing, children running underfoot and stealing cookies when they thought no one was looking. Katherine stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the celebration, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. A year ago, she had been trapped in her father's house, watching him drink himself to death, and knowing there was nothing she could do to stop it. Now she was surrounded by people who cared about her, planning a future with a man who loved her, living a life she had never dared imagine. Thomas found her there and pulled her into the party, dancing with her until they were both breathless and laughing. "What are you thinking about?" he asked as they swayed to a slow song. "About how much my life has changed," Katherine said. "About how grateful I am for everything that has happened, even the bad parts, because they led me here to you." "No regrets?" Thomas asked. "Not a single one," Katherine said, and she meant it. The new year brought renewed energy and purpose. Katherine worked harder than ever, determined to pay off her remaining debt as quickly as possible. Thomas finished training the last of the 50 horses, earning his bonus and praise from Marcus, who immediately contracted him to train another 30 head. Spring came early that year, the snow melting in March instead of April, the prairie exploding in wildflowers almost overnight. Katherine's debt dwindled with each passing week, the numbers in Marcus's ledger slowly approaching zero, and then, on a bright morning in late April, Marcus called her into his office one final time. "Katherine Bailey," he said formally, "as of today, your debt to me is paid in full. You are free to leave this ranch whenever you wish, with my gratitude and my blessing." Katherine stared at the ledger, at the line of zeros that marked the end of her obligation. She had done it. She had worked off every penny of her father's debt through her own labor and skill. She was truly free now, beholden to no one, able to make her own choices and live her own life. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "for everything. For giving me a chance when no one else would, for treating me with respect and kindness, for becoming the father I should have had all along." Marcus came around the desk and pulled her into a hug. "You are like a daughter to me," he said gruffly, "and I am proud of the woman you have become. Now go find that young man of yours and make some wedding plans. I expect an invitation. You hear me?" Katherine ran out of the office and down to the corrals, where Thomas was working with a young filly. She called his name and he turned, seeing her face, understanding immediately what her expression meant. "It is done?" he asked, vaulting over the corral fence and running to meet her. "It is done," Katherine confirmed. "I am free, Thomas, completely free." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. "Then marry me," he said. "Today, tomorrow, as soon as we can get a preacher out here. Marry me, Katherine?" "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the parlor of the Grayson Ranch. surrounded by everyone who had become family to them over the past year. Rebecca cried through the entire ceremony, and Marcus gave Katherine away, walking her down the makeshift aisle they had created between the furniture. The preacher was the same one who had presided over her father's funeral, but this time his words were about love and commitment, and the beauty of two people choosing to build a life together. Katherine wore a dress that Rebecca had made for her, simple white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Thomas wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable and handsome in equal measure. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that Katherine felt her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and so much food that Katherine marveled that she and Rebecca had managed to prepare it all. The ranch hands gave them gifts they had made themselves, horseshoes bent into hearts, carved wooden boxes, a quilt pieced together from scraps of fabric. Marcus gave them the deed to the land Thomas had wanted to buy, a wedding present that left both of them speechless. "I cannot accept this," Thomas protested. "It is too much." "You can and you will," Marcus said in the same tone he had used when forgiving Katherine's debt. "You two are family, and family takes care of each other. Now take your wife and go build yourself a life, but do not go too far. I still need you to train those horses." They spent their wedding night in Katherine's room at the ranch house, which Rebecca had decorated with wildflowers and candles. Thomas was gentle and patient, understanding that despite everything Katherine had been through, this was still new and frightening for her. He held her close and whispered words of love and reassurance, and Katherine felt safe in a way she had never felt before. "I love you," she said as they lay tangled together in the darkness. "I love you so much it scares me." "Do not be scared," Thomas murmured against her hair. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret marrying me." "I could never regret this," Katherine said. "You gave me back my life. You gave me hope when I had none. You saw me at my worst and chose to love me anyway." "You were never at your worst," Thomas said. "Even in that terrible moment at the saloon, you were magnificent. You were fighting for yourself, refusing to accept what your father tried to force on you. That is who you are, Katherine, a fighter, and I am honored to fight beside you for the rest of our days." They started building their house that summer, Thomas working on it in the evenings and on Sundays while Katherine continued helping Rebecca at the main ranch house. Slowly, the structure took shape, a modest two-room cabin with a good solid roof and a large stone fireplace. Thomas insisted on making it as comfortable as possible, adding real glass windows and a proper wooden floor instead of packed dirt. By autumn, it was ready, and they moved in with their few possessions and big dreams. Katherine planted bulbs around the house, daffodils and tulips that would bloom in the spring. Thomas built a small barn for the horses they would eventually own and fenced in a pasture. They worked side by side, building their future one nail, one stone, one day at a time. Marcus continued to employ them both, Thomas training horses and Katherine handling the ranch accounts. The arrangement worked well, giving them income while allowing them to slowly build up their own herd. Thomas proved to have an eye for good livestock, buying young horses cheap and training them to sell for a profit. Within 2 years, they had 20 head of their own, the beginning of what would eventually become a thriving ranch. Katherine discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1885, 3 years after that terrible day in the Silver Dollar Saloon. She told Thomas one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the prairie. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, and watched his face transform with joy. "A baby," he repeated as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not even begin to describe it, Thomas said, pulling her close. You have given me everything, Katherine. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive. Their son was born in January of 1886, arriving during a snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. Rebecca came to help with the delivery, bringing supplies and experience, talking Katherine through the pain with calm efficiency. Thomas paced outside, too nervous to watch, until Rebecca finally called him in to meet his son. The baby was perfect, with dark hair like his father and green eyes like his mother. They named him James, after Katherine's father, because despite everything, she wanted to believe that somewhere deep inside, her father had loved her and would have wanted better for her if he could have managed it. James Garrett, Thomas said, holding his son for the first time with a mixture of terror and wonder. Welcome to the world, little man. Katherine watched her husband with their baby and felt such overwhelming love that she could hardly breathe. This was her family. These two people were hers to love and protect and build a life with. Everything she had been through, all the pain and fear and heartbreak, had led her to this moment, and she would not change a single thing. They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a daughter named Rose and another son named Marcus, after the man who had saved Katherine's life all those years ago. The cabin grew to accommodate the expanding family, Thomas adding rooms and a second story until it was a proper house, warm and comfortable and filled with laughter. The ranch grew too, their herd increasing until they had over 200 head of horses and cattle. They hired ranch hands of their own, young men looking for honest work and a fair wage. Katherine insisted they treat their employees well, remembering what it was like to be powerless and dependent on someone else's goodness. Marcus Grayson became a beloved grandfather figure to their children, teaching them to ride and rope and run a ranch properly. Rebecca was their honorary grandmother, spoiling them with cookies and stories and unconditional love. The two families were inextricably linked, their lives woven together by history and affection and mutual respect. Silas Crane died in 1890, killed when he was thrown from a horse during a drunken race. Katherine felt nothing when she heard the news, no satisfaction or relief, just a vague sadness that a man's life had amounted to so little. She thought about how different things might have been if Crane had succeeded in claiming her, and she was grateful all over again for Thomas's intervention. As the years passed, Katherine watched her children grow strong and confident, raised with love and security. James became a veterinarian, studying at a university back east before returning to Oklahoma to practice. Rose married a teacher and became a fierce advocate for women's rights, fighting for suffrage and property laws. Marcus took over the family ranch, running it with the same integrity and compassion his parents had modeled. Katherine and Thomas grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered droughts and economic downturns, supported each other through illness and loss. When Marcus Grayson died in 1905, they mourned him as the father Katherine had never really had, the man who had given her a second chance at life. You remember that day? Thomas asked her one evening as they sat on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The day I found you outside the saloon. I remember every detail, Katherine said. I remember thinking my life was over, that I had no choices left. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to pray. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, Thomas said. Even with tears streaming down your face, even terrified and heartbroken, you were magnificent. And I knew in that moment that I was going to spend the rest of my life loving you." Katherine reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining the way they had thousands of times before. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray, their hands gnarled with age and hard work. But they were still the same people who had fallen in love by a creek on a summer evening, still the same souls who had chosen each other against all odds. "I would do it all again," Katherine said. "Every bit of it, all the pain and fear and uncertainty. Because it led me to you and to this life we built together." "Same here," Thomas said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing her fingers gently. "Every single moment, good and bad, was worth it." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set over the Oklahoma prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Their grandchildren's laughter rang out across the yard, a sound of pure joy and innocence. In the distance, they could see their cattle grazing peacefully, horses running free in the pastures, the fruits of decades of labor and love. Katherine thought about that young woman who had been gambled away like property, who had stood in a saloon and watched her father sell her to pay his debts. That woman had been broken and afraid, convinced her life was over before it had really begun. But that woman had also been strong, had refused to accept her fate without a fight. And because of that strength, because she had found the courage to trust a stranger with kind eyes, she had built a life beyond her wildest dreams. "Thank you," she said softly, and Thomas looked at her with questioning eyes. "Thank you for seeing me that day, for not walking past like everyone else. Thank you for tearing up those debt papers and giving me back my freedom. Thank you for loving me." Thomas pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You made me better than I ever thought I could be." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Oklahoma sky, Katherine Bailey Garrett felt a profound sense of peace. She had lived a good life, a full life, surrounded by love and purpose. She had raised children who knew their worth, who would carry forward the lessons she and Thomas had taught them about kindness and integrity and the importance of standing up for what was right. The story that had begun with despair and injustice had ended with love and redemption. And while Katherine knew that life was never perfect, that there would always be challenges and hardships to face, she also knew that with Thomas by her side, she could face anything. They stayed on that porch late into the night, holding each other close, remembering their journey together and dreaming about the future their children and grandchildren would build. And when they finally went inside, walking through the home they had created with their own hands, Katherine said a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected blessing that had come from her darkest moment. She had been gambled away like property, treated as something to be owned and used. But a cowboy with a kind heart had torn up those debt papers and given her a chance at real life. And together, they had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. It was, Katherine thought as she drifted off to sleep in Thomas's arms, the very best kind of love story. Not one without conflict or pain, but one where love had conquered all, where two broken people had healed each other and created something whole and good and true. And that, in the end, was all anyone could really hope for.